Oh my goodness, guys. Tank stats have been buffed. Health has been given a 20% increase. Both armors have been increased. So what does the math say with these stats? How do you build health, armor at what points? How much EHP do you get with different kinds of incoming damage? The implications are crazy, as you know what? The math is actually really complicated, and the conclusions we draw from it are even more so. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Paragon guide. I am Sylphin. So guys, we're going to start off with basic armor versus health. Please pay attention during this entire video to exactly what I say. I will make statements that are self-defined and will only be true in itself. So please be very careful with what I say, as I am trying to be as careful with what I say as well. So if we take the health and basic armor of a tank, some of these guys, Richter, Steel, Crunch, Grux, Quang, Chimera, Severog, and we put in the numbers and we run the math with varying levels of basic armor and health, you can see just basic damage. We are just talking basic damage, okay? You're coming up against a whole team of carries, or people only going to use basic attacks. I'm just saying that to prove the point. Look at what happens. You need to go into a lot of basic armor first, and then you go a 1-to-1 ratio of health. So here you need 12 more CP of armor before going into health. If you just want to mitigate basic damage, and you don't care about ability damage. So what does this mean for other heroes? These folks here with a little bit less base health and casters and supports like this. Yes, there are a few outliers from these three categories, but guys, it's really minimal, and the math basically doesn't change for them. They get just a little bit more or a little bit less than others. Really doesn't change much. For these guys here, you can see they kind of go down to the 10, and then they start going down, and then casters and supports, they get a little bit less armor, and then they go into health. This is just basic damage. Please remember that. Great. So, you know, you build a little bit less basic armor than previous version 40, but health is still in a very nice spot. What if we go down to ability armor? We can see something that is just basically the same. It's basically the same. You build ability armor, about 7 or so for these tankier heroes, and about 4 or so, actually 3 or so, before going into 1-to-1 into health. Now, remember, this is just ability damage. You're up against a team of casters, and they're only using abilities. I'm saying that just to prove a point, because, of course, there's basic damage in there. So, looks very interesting. Before previous version 40, it actually was just a 1-to-1 right from here. Like, right from here. Because of the ability armor getting a 50% buff, it went from 4 to 6. You can see that ability armor now, you go into it first, just like basic armor, and then you start with health. So very interesting. Ability armor definitely is much stronger than before, but health is still really nice. Now, one thing that we can say though, if you put in the early game, kind of like the, you know, the late early game, early mid game stats into here, what actually happens is health beats armor at its own game. Our health beats armor at its own game in the early to mid game, and that's not even considering the fact that health, you know, benefits both types of damage, right? It mitigates both types of damage, while armor only does one. So in the early and mid game, health way better, infinitely better, because it benefits both damage types. Health way better than armor in the early to early mid game. Kind of once you're kind of getting hero level 12, 13, then this kind of relationship this ratio is going to start into effect. But in the early, especially the early game, definitely some point in the mid game, health so much better than armor, because obviously it's going to benefit both types. Now, what about reality? What about reality? Only taking one type of ability, only taking one type of damage, that isn't reality. We take a combination of basic damage and ability damage during the game, during a fight. How much of each eludes us? Agora.gg does not have, there's no basic hero damage and ability hero damage in the total, so we don't know. Yes, you can kind of take a look at who the heroes are and kind of figure out if it's mostly like a Sparrow, all of the damage is going to be basic, whereas you go up against like somebody like maybe a Shinbi or a Countess, it's going to all be ability damage. So it's kind of hard to tell. I've analyzed a few high elo Agora matches and just kind of looked at their hero damage and tried to but it ranged wildly. Anywhere from like 75% of one type to 25 the other, anywhere to 50-50 to 60-40. It was all over the place, which means that incoming, the ratio of basic to ability damage that you take over the course of a match varies dramatically depending on the enemy team composition. So, if we take casters and supports and fighters, kind of all pretty much all the others, yes, the health here does change for those guys like Rampage and stuff, but they have things to buff, like Severog has his stacks, Rampage has his ult that gives him more health, stuff like that. If we're gonna look at casters, supports, and fighters at varying levels of incoming basic damage and incoming ability damage. So like here in this scenario, over the course of a match, we're taking 40% basic damage and 60% ability damage. This is my gut. My gut maybe says, in kind of the bursty meta that maybe is gone. I'm not sure yet. I think we take a little bit more ability damage than basic damage over the course of a game, but I think that might be changing. Now, this scenario down here that we'll talk about has 60% basic damage and 40% ability damage. And this scenario has 50-50. This has a 50-50 split between incoming basic damage and ability damage. What does all that mean, Sylphin? Fantastic, you're talking a lot. Well, take a look. For a 40% split of basic damage and 60% split of ability damage, you can see here you require no basic armor. Nothing. No basic armor. None whatsoever. Now, if you wanted to go into basic armor, it's about negligible. The difference is into total EHP is basically negligible. About 0.25% decrease in your overall EHP per CP, if you choose to take away from health or ability armor and put it into basic armor. Basically, it's negligible. Now, if you choose to go like 10 CP into, about 10 CP into basic armor, well, you're starting to get, well, what is that? 2.5% overall EHP. It's really not that much. So at this split, at a 40-60 split, you can basically almost go equal on basic armor and ability armor, even though kind of to squeak out every wee little bit of EHP, going all ability armor is best. Now we're going to draw some more conclusions afterwards. Hopefully this makes sense. Just bear with me. What about the opposite? Instead of 60% incoming ability damage, we now have 40, and instead of 40% incoming basic damage, we now have 60%. So we have 60% basic damage, 40% ability damage. What does this say? Well, it swings the opposite way. It swings the opposite way. All basic armor and absolutely zero ability armor. But look at this. It is a much bigger decrease in overall EHP per CP if you choose to go into ability armor. It's much more significant at 2% per CP. So every single time you take away a CP from health or basic armor to put into ability armor, that's 2% of your overall EHP gone. So it's a little bit, it hurts you quite a bit more. If you choose to put 5 CP into ability armor to mitigate you know, the 30 pen that a lot of casters put on, you're taking a 10% overall EHP decrease. 10%. Now at this level, you know, maybe you're 30 CP or 30 or 20 or so, probably 20 for a caster support and 30 for a tank. 352 effective HP? I don't know. Is that worth it? On a tank, 526 health, effective health. Is that worth it? We're gonna maybe talk about that later. As you can see on this, if you're going to, if maybe the enemy team has 2 carries, then I would definitely say it's going to be probably more than 60%, to be honest with you, which means that the decrease per CP of total EHP per in order to go into ability armor is going to be much greater. That it's really going to hurt you more in that scenario. You're gonna have to think about it. I like that the math is real. It's much more complicated than I feel like than it was before. Now, what about the last scenario? What if it's just 50-50? 50% basic incoming basic damage and 50% ability damage. Nice and equal. There was a few games where, yeah, I kind of saw, according to the Agora.gg, hero damage, I was like, yeah, it's about 50-50. What does this say? Still in basic armor's favor and not in ability armor's favor. The decrease in overall EHP per CP if you're going into ability armor is a bit, it's less than before, at 1%. So yeah, if you choose to mitigate ability pen in this scenario, you're only talking about 5% overall EHP decrease to mitigate that penetration that Countess is gonna have, so that she doesn't completely burst you down. I think that is much more worth it to me anyways, as well. That's just what the math says, right? Very, very interesting. Still in basic armor's favor, and look at how much health you need. Almost twice as much than armor on caster support. Tank, about, what is that? About 50% more. So very interesting. And as you can see here, I didn't really mention this, you can see, look at this. If 60% basic, if there's a lot of carries on the enemy team, you go as much armor as health on a tank, which is kind of pretty crazy if you ask me. What are some conclusions and some statements we can make? This took me a while. This took me a while trying to interpret what this says, trying to make some clear statements that are true, that are factual, that that's what the math says. It's it's just true. That's what it is. It was hard. So statement 1, health is better than either armor types in the early game. Health beats out armor at its own game. So mitigating basic damage in the early game, health is better than basic armor. Plus it even helps against ability damage. Health is better than either armor types in the early game at their own game, and will give you much more EHP than either armor type. So I think I've explained that one. Health in the early game, oh baby, freaking awesome. Get those Amulet of Veterans, get those, the health card, like just get that health in the early game if you want tank. It's so much better. Beats out armor at its own game, and it works on both damage types. Statement 2, more armor than health, anywhere from 3 to 12 CP's worth, is best when mitigating individual damage types. As we saw on the previous tab, if you only care about mitigating one type of damage, well, then you actually get 3 to 12 CP's worth more of armor than any health that you build. So just make sure maybe you build that health in the early game, and then you just stack on the armor if all you care about is mitigating ability or basic damage. don't do that. Please don't do that. Maybe steel. Steel, actually, he maybe could get away with it with his new ablative plating, ablative shielding, whatever it's called. He could maybe get away with this with basic armor. He could maybe get away with that. But still, I would want to be hard countered on as a steel and then just completely get wrecked. So, anyways, more health than we've established that point. Statement 3: mitigating up to 24 basic pen, 3 CPs worth of basic armor is always worth it. It's always worth it. Even in this scenario, where ability armor was marginally better than basic armor, like the decrease is very, very small. Even in this scenario, a 0.75% decrease in overall EHP to mitigate basic pen, that's worth it. That's completely, entirely worth it. So this statement is absolutely, I think, correct. Mitigating up to 24 basic pen is pretty much always worth it. So mitigating basic pen, that's a go. Mitigating 30 ability pen, 5 CP worth of ability armor, is at most a 10% decrease in overall EHP. Depending on the scenario, unless there's like 70 or like 80% ability damage, like unless it's like all casters on the enemy team, or they're running a Decker gadget Gideon or Howitzer combo, like that crazy wombo potential. Unless that is the scenario, then mitigating 30 ability pen is at most a 10% decrease in overall EHP, which you're building ability armor at that point anyways, so doesn't really need to worry about it. You can choose whether you want to mitigate ability pen if there's like a Countess and then the rest of the enemy team are fighters, and there's like 2 carries, a fighter, and a Richter support. Like, that's a tough decision. That's a tough decision. Do you mitigate the Countess's 30 ability pen, where the other 4 heroes on the enemy team is all physical damage? Like, that's a tough decision. But you can know that it's at most a 10% decrease in overall EHP. How you act on that statement is totally up to you. Statement 5. Building more ability armor than just mitigating ability penetration is only beneficial to overall EHP when ability damage is more than 57% of overall incoming damage. That one's a mouthful. I'm sorry. Building more ability armor than just mitigating ability penetration is only beneficial to overall EHP when ability damage is more than 57% overall incoming damage. That's basically what I just said, actually. If there is that Decker gadget and a Howie Gideon combo, like crazy ability damage potential, basically just stick to mitigating ability pen. And that seems to be about it, at least in the math side. In order to be very efficient and effective, it's going to require a very special occasion for building more armor than 5 CPs worth. There you go. Maybe that's more clear. Building more than 5 CPs worth of ability armor is very situational. The enemy team needs a lot of ability damage in order to warrant more than 5 CP of ability armor. There, actually, that's a good statement. Wonderful. That's a good statement. Hey, nicely done, Sylphin. Pat on the back. Statement 6. The difference is negligible between taking from health or one armor type to build the other armor type. This one, you might have kind of been wondering the whole time, if in all of these scenarios, if I wanted to take from health to build the armor instead of taking away from the other armor, the difference is negligible. Whether you choose to take it, whether you choose to take this armor to build this armor and leave your health, or take this health to build this armor and leave this armor, the difference is negligible. Doesn't matter. It does. It's less than, it was less than 0.5%, something like that. it was incredibly negligible. So it's up to you whether you want to take away from one type of armor to build the other and leave your health, or take away from your health to build that other armor. It's negligible. Very much negligible. So it's up to you what you want to do. If you have a hero kit that works really well with health percentage, like Rampage, for example, you can, well, actually he doesn't scale from that. Anyways, you know what I mean. If your kit benefits from overall EHP, like a Countess, for example, which you wouldn't really build tanky anyways, but it's up to you. You just know that the difference is negligible whether you take from health or armor to build what you're missing. Just know that. Now some conclusion. We've been making conclusions this whole time, which I kind of wanted to save to the end, but that's okay. Conclusion number 1. At least mitigating average penetration amounts seems worthwhile. Mitigating 24 basic damage, mitigating about 20 up to 24 basic pen is definitely worth it. Absolutely 100% worth it. But mitigating about 30 ability pen seems worthwhile. Whether I would rather not get completely obliterated by a Countess. I would rather not, you know, or I would rather not get completely obliterated by a stun lock, you know, slew of abilities. I would rather not, and I think that's really valuable. So I think, at least in my conclusion, my opinion, having at least 24 armor and 30 and 30 armor in order to mitigate the armor penetration, sorry, it seems worthwhile. It seems worthwhile, at least in the math department. And conclusion 2, flexibility seems to be the key. Depending on the enemy team composition, whether it's a 50-50 incoming damage split, a 60-40, 40-60, 70-20, 70-30, sorry. It depends. It seems to be that flexibility is the key. So if you are building your tank decks, your bruiser decks, you know, use those 6 slots on those tanky cards to your advantage. Have, you know, instead of having just, you know, 3 3-point armor cards on each, go have your 3 3-point armor cards on each, but also have 3 1-point cards and 3 1-point and a couple 5s or something like that. Like, make it flexible, because I think what this has concluded is that it depends on the enemy team comp. Flexibility seems to be the key. Make your tank build flexible enough so that if there is 2 carries on the enemy team, which Phase works really well, she can really babysit you know, the melee carry to just farm up quite safely, leaving the range carry, which has an easier time to kind of do that. It is very much possible. If there are 2 enemy carries, basic armor, basic armor, a lot of it, and then you really have to think whether you actually want to mitigate the 30 ability pen you know the caster is building. So it's up to you. And if it swings the other way, like we've said already, Decker, a gadget, and a Howie Gideon combo, oh god, that scares me. You need that flexibility in order to be best. So a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. A lot of talking, a lot of statements, a lot of very weird ways of looking at things. Please watch this again in order to kind of understand exactly what I'm saying, to get the point across. It's very easy for all of this stuff to kind of for us to make our own conclusions, which I've only made 2 after all that I've been saying. I've made 2 and a few more in there, but it's important to rely on statements rather than conclusions. These are truths. These conclusions are my opinions. So please be aware of that when you are talking about the statements and what you have learned here today. Please, ladies and gentlemen, like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about all of this. Am I completely off my rocker? Have I missed something? Is there something wrong? Let me know, please, down in the comments. Please subscribe, guys, if you like this content, as I would love to be able to do it for you in the future. Till next time, like always, guys, stay optimistic and positive.